Beautiful. Okay. So, welcome everyone to the last class on in the series. And tonight's topic is hostage rabbis. Hostage rabbis. So, interestingly enough, the Jewish nation has been through almost everything, and we had many hostage stories. So, we're going to learn about some of the interesting ones, and we're also going to learn about general Torah's, approach. I mean, it's not like it's an ideal subject to have someone captured, taken away. Um, but Torah has ways of dealing with it. Has ways of dealing with it. Torah has things to say about it. So we're going to learn some of the things, historically speaking, and then we're also going to learn at the end. We'll learn a little bit about how does it apply to today's. There's still a bunch of hostages in Gaza, so we're going to talk a little bit about that. So the first thing we're going to talk about is how, before we get into any stories, redeeming hostages is considered a major, major mitzvah. Of course, there's all kinds of mitzvahs that involve doing a favor for another person, giving charity or food to the needy, all those kinds of different mitzvahs. Redeeming someone who's a captive is considered like top, top, top. It's really the greatest mitzvah that you could do. So let's actually look at our first. Oh, I didn't pass these around. Pass them around. There we go. Lee, do you have it?
Yes.
Okay, I'll ask you to start. Text number one.
All right. The greatest mitzvah, the redemption of captives, takes priority over sustaining the poor and providing them with clothing. There is no greater mitzvah than redeeming captives. If we ignore the redemption of captives, we transgress the following prohibitions. You shall not harden your heart to the needy. You shall not shut your hand to the needy. You shall not stand by when your fellow's life is in danger. And you may not allow a worker to be oppressed ruthlessly. In neglecting to redeem captives, we also negate the following proactive mitzvot. You shall surely open your hand to your needy fellow. Your brother shall live with you financially. Love your neighbor as yourself. Rescue those taken for death. And many similar statements. If we delay redeeming captives when it is possible to hasten, it is as if we are spilling blood in every added moment.
Wow. Very, very powerful. So there's so many different verses. There's almost 10 verses that are touched upon. Generally, the concepts that are connected, the concepts that are involved are charity, because you're basically someone is in need. He might not be taken care of properly. If you take him out of that situation, he'll be able to have what to eat, etc. And also, you might be saving a life. You never know if someone's in captivity. So those two things are very, very, very important. And as a captive, they come together. It's two in one. Now, in most stories in history, I mean, we're going to talk more about this later, but I just wanted to point this out now. The hostage situations that happen in modern times are a little bit different than the way they used to be for most of history. At least, the things that the Jewish nation went through is that most of the time in the past, hostages were taken only for ransom. That was basically the concept. They would capture someone, and this is not specifically for Jewish people. It happens, with all kinds of people. They would capture someone and only release them for a certain amount of money. So it was just a matter of money. Today's day and age, there could be a lot of other things involved. I mean, it's not only about money; it's about all kinds of political demands or many other things, as we'll see. Fine. So now with that in mind, so let's get into our first story. So this story is known, it's a famous story. It's known as the story of the four captive rabbis. Very, very fascinating story. The story goes, and I'll just give a brief outline, and then we're going to read some of it from some of the Jewish sources. The story goes that there were four of the leading rabbis of the time. This goes back 1,000 years ago, so this is about the year 950 approximately. And there were four of the greatest rabbis at the time, and they met up together and they went on a trip together. The story goes that they were out to collect funding for their yeshiva, whatever it was. They were collecting money, and they went on a trip together. They left from Italy, a city in Italy called Bari, something like that. So they left on a ship, they set sail, and they were captured by a pirate ship. They were spotted by the ship, and there was a battle, and that's it. They were captured, and now there's four rabbis amongst other people on the ship, but of course the four rabbis, and they're right away recognizable. The chief pirate right away recognized that these are very important rabbis, and right away he saw that it's a business opportunity in his mind. So there's four important Jews. He's gonna be able to make a lot of money off them. The Jewish nation is really gonna want to get them back. The Jewish nation is not gonna want to let them, rot away. And sure enough, he ended up ransoming each one of them in a different city, in a different country even. And because of that, and we'll see what happened, but it ended up setting the tone. It kind of affected the trajectory of Jewish history in a certain sense, because suddenly there was these big rabbis that were distributed in a bunch of different countries. So let's start with text 2. This is from we mentioned this book several times. This is from a book called Sefer HaKabbalah, which literally means the book of tradition, and it records different stories of Jewish tradition. This is one of the famous stories that are recorded there. So I'm gonna add, I guess, David. It's a little long.
It was brought about by God that the income of the yeshiva were used to come from Spain, the land of the Maghreb. If we can help me on that.
Yeah, I guess it's referring to Africa. I'm not familiar.
Maybe. Egypt and the Holy Land was discontinued. The following were the circumstances that brought this about. Ibn Ramahis, the commander of a fleet, left Cordoba, having been sent by the Muslim king of Spain, Abd Rahman Nasser. The commander of a mighty fleet set out to capture the ships of the Christians and the towns that were close to the coast. They sailed as far as the coast of the land of Israel and swung about to the Greek Sea and the islands therein. Here they encountered a ship carrying 4 great scholars who were traveling from the city of Bari to the city of Sephastin, and who were their way to a convention. Ibn Rumahis captured the ship and took the sages prisoner. One of them, the Rabbi Hushiel, the father of the Benu Cananiel, another was Rabbi Moshe, the father of Rabbi Kanoch, who was taken prisoner with the wife and his son. Rabbi Kanoch, who was then but a young lad. The third was Rabbi Shemarian ben Rabbi Elchanan. As for the fourth, I do not know his name. These sages did not tell a soul about themselves or their wisdom. The commander told Rabbi Shemarian in Alexandria of Egypt Rabbi Shemayan proceeded to cross that, where he became a head of the yeshiva. He then said Rabbi Kushiel on the coast of Africa, from the rabbi, the rabbi proceeded to the city of Torah, which was then the mightiest of all. Muslim cities in the land of Maghreb were where he became the head of the yeshiva, where he got his son, Rabbeinu Shanael. The commander then arrived at Cordoba, where he sold Rabbi Moshe for, along with Rabbi Conan. And this affair occurred in the days of Rabbi Sharira Gaon in about 4750, somewhat more or less.
Oh, so that's a very brief quote. So I'll just fill in some details. So this we had his name there, the head of the, I guess we'll call him a pirate. His name was Ibn Rumachis or something like that. Sounds like a Muslim kind of name. And for it's Hebrew, yeah, it's originally from Hebrew. So he, for whatever reason, he decided these four captive rabbis, he decided to ransom them off, each in a different country. I don't know, I'm not entirely clear why he did that. Maybe he felt that one community won't be able to afford four rabbis, only can only afford one. Whatever, but he went pretty far around. So let's actually look at the map. Let's look at the map a little bit to see where he went. So they started off right over here. This is, you can see my mouse. That's Bari. That's a city in Italy, south of Italy.
Yeah.
And they were captured somewhere around there. Now here, this is kind of like an inverted map. So the gray is actually the sea, and everything around it is land. But so he went off. Right, they started off here. This is the bottom of Italy. So the first rabbi, whose name was Rabbi Shemaria, was sold all the way down here in Egypt. He sold them in a city called Alexandria. At that time, there's Jewish communities in Egypt back then. And he ended up moving over to a little bit more east to a city called Fustat. And there, of course, was a Jewish community there, but they did not have a rabbi of a high caliber. But suddenly, this man, Rabbi Shemaria, just showed up. There he is. I don't even know if the community realized that he was a great rabbi, but they saw there was a Jew being sold for ransom.
Wow.
So they gathered the money and they bought him. Right? As we mentioned before, it's a big mitzvah. So they just bought him, and there he is. Suddenly, they realized he's a great sage. They urged him to come be a rabbi, and he ended up moving to Fustat. He started a great yeshiva there. And so that was it. That was stop number one. The next stop, this ship moved west, moved all the way up here to a city called Kairouan. I think something like that. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly, but this is in Tunisia.
I'm glad I'm not the only one having trouble.
So there was also a very big Jewish community in Tunisia at the time. Actually, originally, the first Rabbi Shemaria, who ended up being sold here, was actually born here in Kairouan. There was a big yeshiva there. It was an up and coming Jewish community. So he had been born there. Now he didn't want to return because he was actually scared of traveling the ocean again.
Oh, I guess
The first
so.
time he was captured, so he didn't want to try. So he just stayed put. They sold him they sold him to Egypt. So he stayed in Egypt. He did it, he got a job there. He became a rabbi. He led a very successful yeshiva. So he stayed there. But the second rabbi, who was Rabbi Kushiel, was sold back here, back to Kairouan. And the same thing happened over there. The Jewish community also, they ransomed, they bought him, and they whatever the term is, they paid his ransom. And they also realized he's a great rabbi, and they urged him also to start a yeshiva, lead a yeshiva, whatever it was. But he was very apprehensive. He didn't want to, because originally his life's dream had been to start a yeshiva with his friend, Rabbi Shmarya, the first rabbi. He didn't want to just break up like that, and he actually sent a lot of letters back and forth. And now that they were free, they had freedom, so they sent letters, and we actually have evidence. We have some of these letters. He kept on urging him to come join me here. We want to start the yeshiva together, and he didn't want to. He said, "I can't. I'm not interested in the traveling." And eventually, he agreed, and he started his own yeshiva, also a very successful yeshiva. We mentioned in the quote that we read some of his children. So he had two very famous children. One is known as Rabbi Hananel, another one is known as Rabbeinu Nissim. Both of them wrote very important commentaries on the Talmud. Actually, both of them are printed in the Talmud. Anyone who studied, every yeshiva student knows exactly who those people are. Until today, even though it's 1,000 years ago, they still know who they are. So just to give us an idea of what kind of caliber these rabbis were. Speaking of those letters, actually, so this actually is a piece of one of those letters. This is what came up online. I can't really read much of it, but this is a letter from, I think it's from Rabbi Chushiel, the second rabbi, written to the first rabbi who was in Egypt. The way we have this is because of the Cairo Gniza, as it's called. In Cairo, there's a big synagogue, and during the last century, I believe, someone discovered in the attic that there's thousands and thousands of documents. Some of them are 1,000 years old. Basically, artifacts from Jewish life. All kinds of Jewish manuscripts and writings. There was other, I think in the first class when we mentioned one of the converts. We had the convert who wrote these Christian notes on a Hebrew poem or a Hebrew song. So that was also found in this same synagogue. So that's that letter. So so the third rabbi was sold a little bit further north and across the sea there. He was sold in Spain. He was sold in Cordoba. That's where he ended up. His name was Rabbi Moshe. And we'll see soon also the interesting story of how, what happened to him, how he eventually became a rabbi, even though that wasn't his plan initially. And he also he started a very, very successful yeshiva. People such as Maimonides studied in his yeshiva. So,
wow. How did one become a rabbi in those days? Who was the one who granted the title?
The same way it is today. There was yeshivas, there was rabbis, there was, exactly the same process. There's studying and now.
Like, isn't there somebody who needs to acknowledge it?
Someone who's who is already a rabbi, and he tests the person. He makes sure that he feels comfortable that the person knows his stuff. And that's how I got ordained, so to speak.
Yeshiva is another name for like a center where they study.
Yeah, where they study Torah.
Rabbi, that word that you thought was Africa?
Okay.
I didn't know it, but I looked it up, and it says it's from the old country of Tunisia.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So right near, I guess, Tunis and all that. So that's where that it looked like Ireka, something. And I'm glad you had David read that paragraph because I couldn't pronounce half those words. So thank you, David.
Thank you, David, for sparing us for the. Okay, now we're going to read text 3 in a second about this third rabbi, Rabbi Moshe, who ended up in Spain. But just one interesting anecdote before we get to that. So while he was still in the sea, presumably sometime early on, right after he was captured or they were captured, so he was actually traveling with his wife and son. It's Rabbi Moshe. He was known as Rabbi Moshe ben Enosh. His father's name was Enosh, and his father passed away young, and therefore named his son also Enosh. So it's Rabbi Moshe together with his wife and his son Enosh. And I'm sorry, his name was Chanoch. I'm sorry, I mixed up. Chanoch. Father was Chanoch, and the grandfather and the grandson were Chanoch. Either way, his wife was very young and very beautiful, and the the pirate wanted to take her away, and she was not interested. She was, a religious woman. That's not what she wanted to do. So as like there was like the exchange going on, he was trying to show her all the riches and all the things she's gonna have. So while that's going on, she asked her husband in Hebrew, if she would kill herself right now, would she be resurrected in the future? That's what she asked her husband. And her husband answered back. He right away quoted a verse in Psalms, which basically says that yes. So without thinking twice, he just jumped off the boat, and that was the end of that.
Whoa.
No more, she wasn't there anymore. So of course, besides for him being, his life just changed. He suddenly became a captive, but he also just lost his young wife. Now he's there with his son. Either way, he's eventually sold, after making that whole travel around the whole Mediterranean. He eventually moves back, ends up in Spain. So let's read text 3 to see what happens.
Sounds like the story of Sarah and Rebecca, and then something went wrong.
Right. Unfortunately, it wasn't the first or the last time that these kinds of things happened in Jewish history. Okay, so we're holding 3. I think Chana.
Rabbi Abraham Ivan Daoud, Gershon Date, Kohen, the Book of Tradition, Sefer HaKabbalah. Rabbi Moshe was redeemed by the people of Cordoba, who were under the impression that he was a man of no education. Now in Cordoba, there was a synagogue that was called Knesset HaMikdash, the study gathering hall, where a judge by the name of Rabbi Natan the Pious, who was a man of distinction, used to preside. Rabbi Moshe was seated in the corner like an attendant, and he arose before Rabbi Natan and challenged an interpretation Rabbi Natan had given. When Rabbi Natan and the students heard Rabbi Moshe's words, they marveled to each other and asked him to explain the law to them. This he did quite properly. Then each of them posed to him all the difficulties that they had, and he replied to them with his abundant wisdom. Outside the study hall, there were litigants who were not permitted to enter until the students had completed their lesson. On that day, Rabbi Natan the judge walked out, and the litigants followed him. However, he said to them, I am no longer judge. This man who is dressed in rags and is a stranger is my master, and I shall be his disciple from this day on. You ought to appoint him judge of the community of Cordoba, and that is exactly what they did. The community then assigned Rabbi Moshe a large stipend and honored him with expensive garments and a carriage. At that point, the commander wished to retract his sale. However, the king would not permit him to do so, for he was delighted by the fact that the Jews of his domain no longer needed the people of Babylonia. The report of all of this spread throughout the land of Spain, and the Maghreb and students came to study under Rabbi Moshe. Moreover, all questions which had formerly been addressed to the academies of Babylonia were now directed to him. The communities of West and East did not resume the sending of gifts to the academies in Babylonia because these scholars raised many disciples and the knowledge of the Talmud spread throughout the world. Wow, that's quite a story. That's wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
These 4 captives, and they wound up being in the service of Hashem.
Right.
It's amazing.
Right. Good story.
Yeah, so we don't know what happened to the 4th one. We don't know his name or where he ended up, but presumably a similar kind of story.
Yeah.
Now it's also I also find it fascinating how he was so humble. He didn't just show up and say, you guys don't know what you're talking about. He tried to keep himself quiet. It's only when there was a incorrect ruling in law, the local rabbi ruled incorrectly when he felt he had to speak up, and that's what blew his cover. Um, so text number 4 is going to paint for us kind of the closing and kind of paint for us the shift that happened because of the story. Steve, you have
Yeah, I'll do it.
number 4?
Rabbi Moshe, a big door, Amiel, Yerusha El Ami, volume 3, page 15, the sun set on the Yesabot and the Surah and the Hombita of Babylonia. The world was desolate, and it seemed that Torah was set to be forgotten. But then, precisely at this critical time, the Torah spread to all the corners of the earth, reaching as far as Egypt and Africa, Spain and France. And the God, the GD, left us in a remnant of 4 captives, divine providence, and arranging that these men to be taken captive and sold as slaves in the 4 corners of the world in order to spread Torah even to distant lands. Anyone who looks with open eyes will see that the jug of the oil and the Torah has not yet emptied, for the miracle continues to repeat itself in our days. Just as the Jewish people are internal, so is the jug of the oil internal. Moreover, the eternity of the Torah is the root of the eternity of the Jewish people. She ale shiraba.
Yeah, so that's a separate
That's
thing.
like,
Yeah, I didn't put a number on that because I'm not sure if we're going to read it.
it's like the salt.
Yeah, this is the name of a psalm. This is part of the next story.
Mm.
So that was the ending of that story. So that thanks Steve. So Babylon or Babylonia, whatever it's called, which is basically the area of modern day Iraq, was the center of Jewish learning for about 1,000 years, from beginning of the Common Era, and that's where the Talmud, the Babylonian Talmud, was written. It was basically completed around the year 500, and then for another hundreds of years, that was the Jewish center of the world, even above Israel. There weren't too many Jews living in Israel at that time; they were expelled or whatever it was. But at this time, just around the turn of the millennia, I guess it's called, just around the year 950, 1000, is when it started coming down. The era of Babylon started coming to a close, and just at that time is when suddenly there's rabbis that spread out, and all, these 4 captives, started yeshivas in other places, in Egypt and Tunisia and Spain, and things shifted. So it's a very important story in Jewish history, in Jewish Talmudic history.
Wow,
Okay.
yeah.
So our next story is of course similar area. This is actually more in Germany, and this is about 200 years later. So we're talking about the year 1200 or the beginning of the 1200s, and this is about one specific rabbi. His name was Rabbi Meir. He's known as Maharam. That's the acronym for his name, and he ended up being, for a large part of his life, he ended up being a rabbi in a city or a town called Rothenburg. So he's known as Maharam from Rothenburg. That's like his official title. And he grew up I think he was born in the city of Worms, Germany. And he studied he came from especially, a rabbinic family. So he already learned a lot from his parents. He studied in many different yeshivas that existed in Germany at the time. And then he also, as he grew older, he also traveled to France, which is right next to Germany. He traveled to France. There were many big yeshivas there as well. Most famously, there was a yeshiva of Rabbi Yechiel of Paris, as he was known. Rabbi Yechiel of Paris. It's funny because I studied in France, in a yeshiva right outside of Paris, And the head of the yeshiva, his name is also Rabbi Yechiel.
Hmm.
It's actually my wife's uncle.
Oh,
So it's funny, we always joke about how he's the second Rabbi Yechiel of Paris. But back then, in the 1200s, there was a very famous rabbi who had a famous yeshiva known as Rabbi Yechiel of Paris. And sure enough, the famous disputation over the Talmud that happened in France, I think we mentioned it in the Talmud course. So this Rabbi Yechiel was involved, and he was the teacher of Rabbi Meir of Maharam. Eventually, as we know, in the year 1242, there was public burning of the Talmud. That's what we have here on the screen. Some sort of depiction of someone burning books, French people burning books.
wow.
Yeah, there was 24 wagon loads of Talmud were burnt on that day. So Rabbi Meir actually witnessed that. He was there when it happened, and he wrote this lamentation, which I put in it's the one without the number. This whole section here on the third page. It's a very long lamentation. I just put one section of it, but he writes about how the books are burning and the sadness that's involved. Many communities say this lamentation on Tisha B'Av, on the 9th of Av, when we mourn the destruction of the temple. Okay, now what does this have to do with being captive? So far, nothing has to do. We're just painting the story of his life. If you look here on the map on the screen, you have here, this is a map of Germany, and that's Worms. So it's towards the bottom. It's actually pretty close to France. I think today Worms is not even a city. It's like a little, like almost like a neighborhood. It's a very, very small area. But this is where our character, this is where our hero was born, and he traveled around. He was a rabbi in different places, and also eventually he became the rabbi of Rothenburg, wherever that is, somewhere in that area, in that vicinity. Now here we have our next spot in the story. This is a city which today is in France, right at the edge of France. And in French, it's pronounced something like Unsizon or something like that. But you could tell from the name, it's of German origin. The name, it used to be, I guess, related to Germany or part of Germany, something like that. And this is where the main part of our story takes place. So let's see what events happened that took us to this city. So let's read text number. Text number, 1 second. Text number 5. Yeah, okay. It's at the bottom of the page, called Daring Dash. Let me get it up for Lee. Let's get it up here. Okay, there it is. Do you see it, Lee?
Yeah, you want me to read that one?
Yeah, please.
Thank you for giving me one that doesn't have all the hard words that David had to read.
Oh, we'll see. We'll see about that.
Our teacher, Rabbi Meir of Rothenburg, son of Rabbi Baruch of blessed memory, set out on a journey to cross the sea, along with his household, his daughters, son-in-law, and all his possessions. He arrived at a city situated among the high mountains, known as the Lambarshi Gebirge, in the Lombard Alps in Germany. He intended to stay there until all those traveling with him would gather there. Suddenly, the wicked bishop of Basel rode down from Rome through that city. Together with him was a wicked Jewish apostate named Nep. And Nepi recognized our teacher and informed the bishop. This caused the Count of Gorizia, the lord of that city, to arrest him on the 4th day of Tammuz in the year 46 of the 6th millennium, 1286 of the Common Era, and hand him over to King Rudolph.
Oh, there we go. So we have the story of Rabbi Meir who decided to move to Israel. And what was going on? So apparently there was some sort of persecution for the Jewish people in Germany, or at least the area where he was. There's a lot of taxes, and it came to the point where he decided he wants to get out of here. He wants to move to Israel, and he tried escaping. And apparently, where he was captured, I'm not sure if it was still in Germany or maybe it was already part of Italy. I'm not sure exactly where this happened, but somewhere there was a Jewish man who decided to identify him, and the authorities, the king was upset, and they just captured him. That was it. He's captured, and there he is. He was taken to the castle of the king or whoever it was, the prince, which was right here in the city of Unsizan. So there he is. There's this great rabbi, Rabbi Meir, and he's a captive. They set a ransom. They put a price on him, which was crazy amount of money. It was like 20,000, whatever unit of money it was back then. And he's there. And of course, the entire Jewish community loves him. They want him back. He was a very famous rabbi. I mean, he was basically the authority in the whole Germany. He was the top rabbi of Germany. I mean, everyone went to him everyone went to his yeshiva. Everyone wanted to hear his opinion on everything. So everyone wanted to do everything it takes to get him out of there. They were ready to raise all the money and get him out of there. Now, sure enough, Rabbi Meir decided, I don't want a single penny to be spent on me. Don't waste your money on me. I'm staying here. Either the king lets me out or I'm going to die here. That was literally what he was ready to do. He just stayed there. And that's exactly what happened. He spent 7 years captive in this castle, whatever it was. Apparently the king did permit to have students visit once in a while. He did have contact with the outside world. He wrote letters, different things. But he was basically stuck there for 7 years, and he passed away. After 7 years, he passed away. And after he passed away, he was still stuck there. He just stayed there, and it took 14 years after he passed away until there was a rich Jew who came along and paid the money and took him out. He had this rich Jew who only had one condition. He said, I want that when my time comes, he had this great rabbi buried in a nice, in a respectable manner in the Jewish cemetery back in Worms, which was where he was born. This rabbi was born. But his condition was when my time comes, I just redeemed him. I brought him to Jewish burial. I want to be buried next to him. And sure enough, a year later he passed away, and he was buried right next to him. And we even have this is the grave. This is their graves. So it's very, very difficult to read. If you go there in person, it might be easier. So I'm actually reading out. So the one on the left says Rabbana Meir ben Baruch, right? So that's the rabbi, and there's a whole inscription. And then the left, it's just he wasn't a rabbi, just a regular wealthy Jew. And there's a whole inscription there which describes how he brought the rabbi on his left or his right to Jewish burial, and because of that, he was buried here. So this is what it looks like. This is there till today in Germany. If you zoom in, you see that the little blue candle. That's a typical yahrzeit candle, and on the rabbi's grave. So this is that. Now, so where did this idea come from? This rabbi was not ready to have money be spent on him. He didn't want himself to be ransomed. So where did this come from? So we have text number 6, which is a quote of the Talmud, which applies to redeeming captives. I think it's David's turn.
For the sake of society at large, captives are not redeemed for more than their actual monetary value. The reason for this is so that the captors will not seize additional captives.
That makes sense.
Right, it's a very interesting law, and
Yeah.
it's unfortunately it was also a very difficult law
Yeah.
because this happened. It happens many times in history. And now, how do you calculate what's a person's monetary value? So, for a lot of history, it was actually very easy to calculate because there was a slave market. So people had that's how people had value, however much they were worth on the slave market. So if the ransom being asked was more than what the person is worth on the slave market, then at that point this law in the Talmud comes along and says don't spend money on that.
About the hostages that are being held now.
Yeah, me too.
Right.
We express how upset we are about it. Aren't we increasing their value?
By talking about it.
Yeah.
Okay,
It's, privately and wonderful, but what we're doing is we increase their importance in the eyes of those animals that took them. They seek to take advantage of it.
yeah,
Right. Don't forget the one who orchestrated October 7th, Sinbar, was already convicted of murder. He was in an Israeli jail, and they let him out in exchange for other Jews who were captured. And then he trained these people and launched October 7th, which is
Right.
why, for learning from our history, you can't let a murderer out because he'll just do it again and again and again.
Right. Yes, it's a very difficult subject, and we're actually going to talk a little bit at the end of the class after we get through everything else. But yeah, this is going to be this piece of Talmud is going to be, I think it's the most important like source that we have on the subject. So we're going to keep this one in mind. So yeah, so back to the year 1280 or somewhere around then. So we have Rabbi Meir, who literally applied this in real life, and he was ready to sacrifice the rest of his life, the rest of his career, the rest of everything to fulfill this law. And really, the what? Well, let's read text number 7. Actually, let's read exactly what was the background. Yeah, text number 7. Let's turn.
I heard about Rabbi Meir of Rothenburg, who was imprisoned in the fortress of Enstechheim for several years. And the ruler commanded a large sum from the communities for his release. The communities wished to ransom Rabbi Meir, but he refused, arguing that captives should not be redeemed for more than their worth. His reasoning must have been that if the communities would ransom him, it may incentivize the other rulers to do the same and hold other prominent Torah scholars hostage for exorbitant ransoms. Eventually, the wealth of the entire Jewish people would not suffice to ransom them, and the Torah would be forgotten among the Jewish people. Here is the proof that he was right. After this case, the ruler stopped seizing sages and holding them for ransom.
So apparently that he was really, Rabbi Meir and even the Talmud were really onto something. It's really an incentive for bad people to capture someone and sell them for ransom. And he put a stop to it after he refused to be ransomed. It did not continue. I mean, you can imagine how foolish the whichever ruler it was. He captured this rabbi, and the guy's just taking up space in his fortress, in his dungeon, for year after year after year, and he without getting a penny for him. So it was just a waste, and it was embarrassing.
And he really knew the Torah to know to do that. That's amazing.
Yeah, it's a very big sacrifice. I mean, it's one thing to give up your life, to die, because that's just a 1 second. It just happens very quickly. But to every day for year after year to wake up every day and know that there's like an easy way out, but it's against the law. That's a whole different level. Okay. Very, very special. So text number 8 is our last text. This is a quote from this rabbi himself. He wrote this is from his responsa. We have some of it is printed. So apparently he wrote this quote while he was in the prison. I think Steve.
Total devotion, Rabbi Meir of Rothenburg, responsa 2-151. When I am released to safety, I will gladly ensure that you receive a copy of my commentary on the Zera and the Tahara. During my imprisonment, I have not forgotten my Creator, and I have remained devoted to his Torah and to the fear of heaven from the soul obedient to your command. The impoverished, the individual forgotten of all goodness, and downtrodden doormat, once known as Meir, the son of Rabbi Baruch of blessed memory.
So you see what kind of titles he writes about himself. He thought that like his life was worthless, and in a way, it really was. Like he just stuck there for years. Very special story. I mean, he's a very big rabbi. So besides for the story, we have a lot of his halachic rulings. I mean, they say a number of like 1,500 of his responsa that we have, and
Wow.
possibly there was more. That hasn't survived.
Yeah.
Very special story. Now, the last story, I don't have any text about him, but we'll just talk about it outside. Let's see if I have anything else here. Oh no, that's the last one. Okay. So moving forward another couple hundred years in the 1600s. So of course we know about the Cossacks, which was, I think it was Ukrainians or Russians, which wiped out many Jewish communities, which very sad stories in its own right, but it's not our topic, because our topic is captives. But at the same time as the Cossacks, there was another phenomenon. There's another kind of tribe or another kind of nation called I'm not sure how to pronounce it, Tatars, something like that. They were Muslims actually, and they also together they kind of had an alliance. They kind of had they also fought together with the Cossacks. However, they were big into slave trading. And because of that, they captured a lot of people, not only Jews, but they also did capture a lot of Jews. That was like their priority. They captured thousands of Jews, and they ended up taking them. This is happening in Poland and Ukraine. This is the area that this is happening. I think mainly in Poland. That's which Jewish communities were affected. They captured many of these Jews, thousands of them, and they ended up transporting. They had like a march, almost like they had in the Holocaust. They had a march where they marched from Poland south, basically to the sea. It was many days, and many people died, of course, on the march, as you can imagine. And then from the sea, they took them in ships and they sent them to so their base was in Crimea, right? Crimea. That's where these Tatars were like based. That was their country. But they also had an alliance with the Turkish Empire at that time. So they dropped off some of the Jewish slaves or some of the slaves in general at their own country, and then they took the rest of them to Turkey, to Istanbul, or at that time it was called
Constantinople.
Whatever it's called, yeah,
Constantinople, yeah.
Constantinople. Now at that time there was a very big Jewish community there. I mean, actually, a lot of people don't know this, but I was just a couple of days ago, I was listening to an interview with actually a Chabad rabbi who's a rabbi in Turkey, and he says that there was a Jewish presence for 2,700 years in Turkey. It's one of the oldest Jewish communities, the oldest synagogues in the world. Some of them are in Turkey. Yeah, so I mean, this now we're only talking about 400 years ago, so it's not even so long ago. There was a very big Jewish community in Turkey, and they started seeing there's all these Jewish slaves that are showing up, and they realized there's a really big crisis, and they actually ransomed the large majority of the Jewish slaves were ransomed, were bought back by the local Jewish community. I mean, so they literally they did so much. I mean, they collected money within their own communities. Eventually, the women started selling they started pawning their jewelry. They also started a new tax for meat. There was a special tax for meat in Constantinople at the time. They added basically one called a sol. I think the currency was called a sol. They added one sol for every pound. So there's a special tax, and on the Jewish community's meat, and that was within the Jewish community. They made their own tax, and so that extra money from the tax went to help the needy Jews and help the captives. And eventually, as the number started getting more and more, they started running out of money, and they started reaching out to other communities. And the problem was that the places where these Jewish slaves were coming from were in Poland and Ukraine. There was no community there anymore because the Jewish communities had been either wiped out or ransacked or whatever. So they had to get creative and which communities they could turn to. But they eventually redeemed thousands and thousands of Jews. I mean, there's historians that write about it, how fascinating it is, how how the Jewish community had such strong care for each other, and they made sure that no Jew would be stuck, no Jew would be a captive just for no good reason.
Rabbi, what year approximately was this?
This is like 1650,
Okay.
somewhere around there.
The reason why I asked, my family in Israel, they came from Turkey to Jerusalem. They said 9 or 10 generations ago. So that would have been maybe a couple of hundred years later than this, I'm guessing.
Right.
And they lived in Jerusalem. Eventually, they moved to Haifa, but they were in Jerusalem during the Turkish rules. And then they moved to Haifa when the British took over in World War I.
Wow.
Oh,
So also what's very unique about this story is that the Jews in Poland, Ukraine, are all Ashkenazic.
Hmm.
And the Jews in Turkey were not Ashkenazic at all. They're more Sephardic, or even possibly even a different, slightly different kind of strain of community, but very, very different customs. Everything, the foods are different, right? In Poland, they eat gefilte fish, and Sephardic eat I don't know what. Like I'm not Sephardic, but different. Everything's different,
stuffed grape leaves.
right? Grape leaves,
So how do we come together with something in common? I mean,
right? So what's so fascinating is that Jewish people, even though there's so many differences, but at the end of the day, we're one nation. And that was felt so strongly that even with so many differences and so many different customs and backgrounds and everything, the Jews in Turkey, or whatever it was called then, were put in so much effort and so much resources to redeem their fellow Jews, even though none of them were the same. A lot of them didn't even stay local. A lot of them ended up moving back, back to Europe.
how widespread were copies of the Torah?
Oh, very, very widespread.
Pardon?
Especially back then. I mean, at that point there was already printing presses, and there was, yeah, the Torah was available, of course.
Okay. Very good.
So what's unique about this story is that it's not only about one captive or four captives. It's about thousands of whole communities. What is interesting is that there's one rabbi coming from Poland. His name was Rabbi Yaakov Koppel Margolis. That's how he's known, and we don't know that much about him, but we have two short books that he wrote that are printed, and in the introductions, he writes like a short introduction, and he writes the background. So he was one of these captives. Him together with his son and his daughter, they were taken captive to this place. Now he was kind of redeemed first, but then he wanted to raise money to redeem his children. It didn't have money. It wasn't available. So because he was a rabbi, he decided he wrote these books so he could sell the books to get money to redeem his children. And that's what he writes in the introduction. And we also have the books. They were in print. They were printed in I think they were printed in Venice at that time. That was how they were able to get it done. And they were distributed, and apparently it was successful. His plan was successful. We also have letters from the local rabbis in Turkey who write about this fellow, and they write like a recommendation. There's this rabbi here, Yaakov Koppel, and he's writing these books. Please help out. Please sell the books. That's another unique story. And so that's the third story. Now we wanted to talk about the current hostage
Yes.
situation. It's very, very interesting to talk about. So we mentioned really two things that we mentioned from the Torah. On one hand, we mentioned how important it is, how it's such a massive mitzvah, the greatest mitzvah we called it. It's the greatest mitzvah to redeem someone who's a captive. That was on one hand. On the other hand, we had this concept that not to redeem someone for more than their value. Right? So suddenly there's like this qualification, there's a limitation of when in certain situations you're not supposed to redeem the captive. So first up, we have certain opinion. There are a few opinions in the Tosfos, which is a commentary on the Talmud, that mention that this whole restriction of not redeeming a captive above their value is only if the person is not if their life is not in danger.
The what?
If the captive's life is not in danger. If they're safe and it's just a matter of, comfort, so then you could redeem them for their value, but not for more than their value. But if their life is in danger, then we do everything. I mean, just, the whole Torah, we override everything in the Torah to save someone's life. Saving a life is the most important thing. So that's one opinion that comes up. The Tosfos says that. Now there are other rabbis who disagree, and they say that's not true. They say they understand that every captive's life is in danger, no matter how comfortable they are, no matter they're in someone else's hands. They're always in danger.
Yeah.
So if the Talmud gave us that restriction, it must have applied even if someone's life is in danger. So that's already a discussion. That's already a discussion over there.
Question comes to mind about something we might learn from Abraham and not Isaac, Jacob. These, in this case, obviously, Sarah and Rebecca are not in danger.
Right.
And so the way they behave, is that an example?
It could be. I mean, we don't see anything that was done to take them out, to redeem them, other than like prayer. Abraham prayed or whatever it was.
Rabbi, does this apply to Jews whose bodies are there but they're deceased?
So that's a good question. That might be a separate discussion. Possibly.
Because you said that one man bought the rabbi after he died, and he spent a lot of money.
Right.
And now in Israel, most of the captives that are still there are dead. So at what point what do we offer them? Do we give back terrace so they can do it again and again?
Right. So you're bringing up another point. So regarding someone who's dead, I'm not sure exactly. I don't know enough about the subject to tell you how that plays into, if that's considered as a captive, or maybe that's a different category. There definitely is importance to have a Jewish person buried, no matter who they were. I don't know. I'm not sure if it falls into the same category as redeeming a captive. I'm not sure about that. But the other point you mentioned is regarding terrorists, right? Nowadays, it's not about money. The captives, especially, the captives that are in Gaza now, it's not about money. We're ready to give any money. The terrorists they're not ready to release the hostages because of money. That's not what it's about. They're asking for terrorists. So that's a separate discussion. So there have been rabbis. I mean, this is a rabbi that wrote this back in the 70s. He wrote that we apply the same like measurements, the same guidelines as we would have applied by money. So in other words, we look around at other countries. What are other countries' standards? How many terrorists are they, or how many prisoners are they ready to release in exchange for one hostage? And that becomes our limit. We have to follow the standard of other countries, and whatever's beyond that is too much. So that's what one rabbi suggested. Yeah.
Now, there a status of a person who's a hostage and who's deceased? Because I just heard a story from a rabbi, his assessment, saying that this is the thought. It just flew away.
Okay, when it comes back, I want to hear it.
Later.
Yeah, so I'm not gonna come here and tell you the definitive answer of what's Torah's approach to, yeah.
Just came to mind that those people who historically attack Jewish communities, one of the first things they go after are the Jewish cemeteries. They destroy them, and his assessment is that our strength is in our ancestors, and they know it. And
Oh, interesting.
yeah,
Interesting.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so this is what one rabbi suggested, that there's a concept of what's normal regarding releasing terrorists, but then a few years later, the same rabbi himself, he realized that there was kind of like a change in the world, and he realized that countries don't really release prisoners in exchange for hostages. It wasn't a thing anymore. So he realized that that's not, we don't follow that anymore. So he kind of retracted his. Then we have there's a couple other factors, a couple other things to decide. So, for example, there was one rabbi who followed what the Tosfos says. One rabbi, contemporary rabbi from today, he says that whenever someone's life is in danger, that overrides everything. So we don't care about any minimums or any maximums. What's considered more than their value, or what's considered their value. If their life is in danger, then we're ready to do everything. And his understanding is, we're ready even to release other terrorists, because that's not, in his understanding, the terrorists they're going to engage in terrorist activity no matter if some of them are in prison or if less of them are in prison or more of them are in prison. They're going to be doing what they're doing either way. So he doesn't feel that that's an issue. That's one way of looking at it. On the other hand, there's several other factors that other rabbis raise. First of all, some rabbis say that when you're dealing with a time of war, this whole rule doesn't apply. You don't know when it comes to the whole concept of fighting a war is basically endangering your own life, right? If I'm a soldier and I'm going to fight a war, I'm putting my life in danger.
Yes.
Right? How is that allowed? We're not supposed to endanger our life. We're supposed to do everything to save our life, right? We're ready. The Torah is ready to suspend any law in the Torah just to save someone's life. So how are we? So obviously, when we go out to war, obviously none of these things apply. So when we're going, so some rabbis understand that, from from when the state of Israel was created, it's one long war. It's one big time of war. So this whole concept, don't come and tell me that when someone's life is in danger, we have different, this whole thing doesn't apply, because the whole concept of war it disregards that.
And one of the big controversies in Israel right now is some people want to go out and wipe out the enemy and save the hostage, save the hostages. And others, well, yeah, at any price, they want to save the hostages. Yet, if we don't go to war, what happens is we're endangering future generations.
Right. So also that's exactly, it leads me to another point I wanted to mention, is that people look at it like this. So other rabbis have brought up this point. If I, I have two options. I could either release thousands of terrorists, like has already been done, and save a few Jewish hostages. And now I'm saving these people's lives. What I'm also doing is I'm also potentially endangering thousands of other Jewish lives, because of all those terrorists who have track record of doing what they do, and they're going to get straight back to work. And like Lee mentioned, the mastermind of October 7th was actually a terrorist who was released in a previous hostage deal. So in other words, when you're making such a kind of deal, you're basically, I mean, of course, it's all in potential and it's all in the future, but you're basically sacrificing many future potential casualties to save this one person. So in other words, you're pushing away these lives to save these lives, and we don't do that. We don't push away life. In that kind of situation, we just stay put. So that's another thing that's mentioned in other rabbis. So it's very strongly debated, and there's no clear halachic ruling.
I think for myself, I enjoy the President Donald Trump, how he came up with this idea. I think he came up with it to just take over Gaza. Because if you just give it back to the Palestinians, and they're all connected to all the evil, right, and all the terrorist and evil stuff. So just take the property and pay whoever you got to pay. There's some citizens out there, they're just in the middle of whatever, right? So if you can help some people, but just to take over the land, because as it is, I think the descendants of Gaza were like, I don't know, they were bad. It's the bad bloodline, I think.
But the thing is, I think it's a blessing in a way.
Yeah.
Because it's wisdom that Donald Trump's come as life. Because if you take the people out of Gaza and spread them up among nations, they'll pick up some goodness and get rid of some of that badness. And when they come back, they might be, they won't be under the influence of their evil leaders.
I totally agree.
Yes, I don't want to get too much into this kind of things. I want to stay more on the topic of hostages. but I want to stay focused on the Torah perspective on hostages.
Yeah,
But one thing I want to end off, all these things are really, it's not really so much in our power. I mean, we're not in politics. I mean, I'm definitely not and I don't have any power politically, but what we do have, and this is spiritually, we do have a lot of power. We know that every time we do something good, every time we do a mitzvah, we add some spiritual goodness to the world, that diminishes the spiritual evil. Right? There's good and there's evil both in spirituality. So every time we do something good, that has an effect. So if we want to save those hostages, we can't go in there with guns, and we can't. That's not up to us. But what we could do is every time we do another act of kindness, every time we do another mitzvah, and every time we add more good spirituality, that has an effect. So let's keep on doing that, and maybe we see the hostages. May they all come out safe and sound very soon.
Yes, very soon.
All right. Thank you for joining me in this beautiful, beautiful course.
Before you